Aidan, it's lovely to
Hello.
meet you.
It's lovely to meet you as well. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to move on to our first question, and a bit of a icebreakery question, but I'd really like to hear about your interest in biodiversity, nature, and green skills.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aidan. So I grew up in Calgary, which is near the Rocky Mountains in Canada. So that's near Banff National Park. And my parents were quite outdoorsy. So as a child, I was taken into the mountains for hiking and skiing, cross-country skiing. You know, where I grew up, you could see elk, you could see bears, all sorts of wildlife, beavers, mountain goats, mountain sheep, all sorts of things. So I grew up in a very wonderful natural environment and really learned to value that for its own sake. And it's such a privilege to be the Minister for National Parks in Scotland, because I think national parks are such special places where they bring people and nature together.
Yeah, I agree with that completely as well. Coming from the national park here and being immersed in it, and it's quite cool to get involved with it as well. So thank you for that. My second question, what green career options are there for young people, and how can we increase access to these opportunities for them to gain green skills?
That is a brilliant question. There are enormous opportunities in green skills for young people, and green skills is very broad. So for the purpose of this conversation, let's talk about land-based green skills, because we can talk about jobs in renewable energy as green skills. There's tons of work in the circular economy space, things like recycling and designing for repair. But because we're talking about national parks, let's talk about land-based skills. So there's huge amounts of opportunity here. And in fact, a lot of work in these areas, we don't have enough people to take on the jobs at the moment. So this is things in nature restoration, for example, is a big part of what we're going to be working on nationally, but especially in the national parks. Scotland's natural environment is heavily degraded, which means there's big opportunities for putting it back. And that means peatland restoration, that means reforestation of native woodlands, that means rewilding of some species like beavers. So all of those projects require not only the sort of project planning and admin, the comms, the storytelling, the filmmaking that goes around that. It requires on the ground practical skills, people who can trap beavers, people who can do that animal management, people who can plant the trees, drive the heavy equipment that you require to do those skills, that heavy equipment to do that peatland restoration, to move the trees around. If you're doing riparian planting of trees, that's planting trees on riverbanks, and sometimes we even put the trees back in the rivers to help create obstacles to flow, and wonderful places for salmon to spawn and insects to live. So there's all these sort of practical skills, and then on top of that, there's all the science that goes with that, because with those nature restoration, you have to study it to see, you have to make sure that that beaver you're translocating doesn't have any diseases. So veterinary skills, you need to make sure that the trees that you're planting are healthy. You need to be able to measure to see that you are actually improving the environment, that peat you restored is now absorbing carbon rather than releasing it. So there's huge potential right across the spectrum, whether you're a filmmaker, storyteller, whether you're someone who's really good at organizing and project planning, right to whether you're someone who's good at driving big equipment or measuring carbon dioxide. There's something there for everybody.
Thank you for that. And a bit of a follow-on question. Untraditional green skills, green careers, how do you think we can get young people into those more, jobs that aren't national parks or aren't with some of our nature organizations in Scotland?
Actually, the skills that we need in a lot of cases are very conventional skills. For example, forestry, long tradition of forestry in Scotland, and there are many jobs in forestry in Scotland that are going unfilled. We don't have enough people to fill them. And whether that's you learn forestry skills through an apprenticeship or through going to a college or university, we don't have enough students for those programs. So we don't do enough to tell young people that these are great jobs. They're jobs on the land, in the out of doors. They're jobs that involve learning and doing something different every day. They pay well. These are great jobs. And so there's something we need to do to communicate that these jobs are available, to make sure that people know that there are great careers in things like forestry, in things like regenerative farming. And again, in all the science that goes with that and all the supply chain that goes along with that. Things like peatland restoration isn't just in the national park, but is going to be everywhere in Scotland. And that requires, the science and project planning to understand what needs to happen to the peat. And then it requires physical skills of driving the diggers to do that construction work, to block up the drains and so on. And then someone needs to measure it and monitor it to make sure it's all happening. So there are so many skills in this area, so many opportunities for young people, that I think that just about anybody who was interested in working with nature or working in the out of doors or with their hands or working to improve Scotland's environment could find something that they would like.
Thank you. And thinking more widely about our climate and nature, what role do you think young people are going to play in tackling our climate and nature crises, and how do you think green careers are going to feed into that?
I mean, young people do have these enormous opportunities. We often have a very downward looking view of the future, but I think the future has great opportunities. The future can be brilliant if we just make it so. There are all these opportunities for building a better and different kind of Scotland. And that means a Scotland where people have living wages, affordable housing, and jobs that are meaningful to them and build strong communities. Now, that's something that the Scottish Government is really committed to. And I think the program, like what you're doing in the national parks with the youth committee, is exactly that kind of engagement, because we don't want to be the kind of government that does things to you. We want you to say what you want, and then we're your elected representatives. We're here to deliver that. So the more engaged young people can be, the better. So in some ways, the answer is it's up to young people. When there are people like yourselves and your young colleagues who are engaged, who come along and have their say, who write me letters, who tell me what they think, who get involved in their local communities, that means that I have the opportunity to hear what you want. Because if you don't talk to me, if you don't write me letters, if you don't come along to community events, I don't know what you're thinking. So how much young people engage absolutely determines how well we're able to meet your needs. So it's so brilliant that you're able to engage in this way, and I would encourage more young people to do that, because the future is yours. We're offering you the opportunity to tell us what you'd like that future to look like.
That's amazing, thank you. And now we thought quite broad, bringing it back down to a national park level and protected spaces. What role do you think national parks and protected spaces, perhaps in Scotland and across the world, what role do you think they're going to be playing in tackling these big issues?
That's a very interesting question to ask right now, because we're currently have a consultation open nationally, which anybody can contribute to ask that question of the people of Scotland. What would you like your national parks to be for? So we've had 2 national parks now for 20 years, and we're looking at creating at least 1 new national park in this term of Parliament. So it's a good time to have that conversation. What is a park for? And what is it for the local people who live there? What is it for the country? And what is it for the world? So in Scotland, we have the goal to protect 30% of Scotland for nature by 2030. So that's enormous. That's huge tracts of Scotland protected for nature. We cannot do that without our national parks being heavily focused on protected for nature. And when we say protected for nature, I think we mean a lot of that needs to be under active restoration, because as we've discussed, our natural environment is heavily degraded in Scotland. So I think that's where the parks have a key role to play in showing the rest of the country how people and nature can thrive alongside one another, because the parks are full of people, not only the communities that live there, but millions and millions of visitors. So this isn't a question of people or nature. It has to be people and nature. So what does regenerative farming look like? What does zero carbon travel it look like? What does that carbon sequestration and that thriving natural environment with beavers and squirrels and eagles, what does that look like? And how do people live alongside that and thrive? So the parks, because they have this special facilitation ability to get people around the table and make the community work together, they have the energy to do that and the tools to do that. They can show the rest of us the way. They can sort of pilot what actually we probably want for the whole country.
Thank you for that. And a bit of a follow-on question from that, thinking about national parks being facilitators and getting people around the table. and being sort of role models for how the rest of the country could work. How do we get young people around that table and getting them interested in national parks, and hopefully getting them interested in green careers? Because there's lots of barriers that, whether it be transport, whether it be, discrimination, whether it be, costs. And how can we, as people, as a national park, as a government, how can we make sure that the new national park and our current national parks are as accessible as possible?
So I think there's two questions there. One is about accessibility in terms of young people being able to enjoy the parks, and those young people who live in the parks to be able to live full lives. And I think there's also a piece there about how we get young people to engage with what a park is and what the park's doing with them, and how they can work in that space, whether it's for the park or in the park doing green skills. For the second one, I'm kind of hoping you can tell me, because it would be helpful to understand what the barriers are for young people. I know one of them is that we don't tell young people about the great opportunities, for example, in forestry. And another one is if you don't know these jobs are available, if you don't know these exciting careers are there, why would you you wouldn't know where to start, would you? So I think some of it is we have to do better with communicating that. But I actually think young people, more than ever, what they really want is to do something meaningful with their lives. They don't want to work one of these, dead-end jobs that doesn't change the world in any way. I think people want to see their piece of the world, whether that's their community get better, or they've planted that set of trees, or helping their business thrive. I think they want to see change and be able to make that change. So the national parks is a place where you will be able to see that change on the ground. As we get towards that 30 by 30, Scotland will start to look different. Our hillsides will look different. Our communities will look different. The traffic, there'll be less traffic. There'll be more cycling. There'll be more buses. In terms of making the parks accessible to young people, this is something that I feel really strongly about. To me, there's a key piece around public transportation. So just because of the way things are, we don't have public transportation in the parks that works very well for visitors. And it probably doesn't work very well for the young people who live in the park. So they're not able to get to the next village to meet their pals, or to go to the cinema, or do any of the things that young people who live in cities and urban areas can do. So I think that's something we want to look at really closely, is those links. The active travel, allowing you to cycle and wheel and walk more safely around, but also get that public transport up and going. I think that would be such a boost for young people, especially now that we have the free bus travel for under 22s, but it's no good if there's no bus. So that's something I would really like to see improved.
Yeah, no, and I echo that improvement of public transport, especially living in a rural area myself. And I completely agree. Trying to get to the next village over to see a friend, it's sometimes impossible. And to answer your question about, what are the barriers, there's so many, and we do talk in our youth committee about it. And we talked about the barriers to green careers in our very last meeting, actually. And we talked about it was access to these opportunities and information about these opportunities. Mm-hmm. And time again, transport comes up. And time again, even in the Europark Youth Manifesto, which was created in 2018, transport was an issue, and also digital connectivity, having Zoom calls instead of going to a community hall, and those sort of things are not always accessible to young people. And it's something that being very lucky in the fact that I have parents who can drive me. I'm in a rural place, but I've got a bus connection to the nearest city. But there's some young people who don't have that, and it's thinking about how can we do that with the resources that we've got, and do we need more resources? And it's thinking about that, and that comes under my bit of work about engagement, and thinking about having young people out to a meeting every single week about what a national park are getting up to isn't going to be the most practical. So it's thinking about, if we're meeting monthly, how can we really have most meaningful conversations in the time that we've got with young people. And this kind of links on to.
Sorry, can I just jump in there, Aidan, before you come into the last question? Can I get you, please, to write me about those 2 points, about the difficulty in accessing the green skills and green jobs, and about your vision, your youth vision for what you'd like public transport in the parks to be? Could you write to me on both of those points? Because really, really useful to me in shaping our vision for the future of the national parks, to understand both of those things, because it's not actually a conversation I've had with a young person before. So if we can get that in the mix, that would be really, really great.
No, I would love to do that, and I'll put some thought into that, and I'll pull together a letter. So thank you for that. So for my very last question, the question I've got written down, I'm going to paraphrase and think about it differently. So if you were in my position, so 17 years old, about to take on the world of work or world of university, what advice would you give 17-year-old Lorna to, about going into the world of work, and maybe specifically into green careers, but, just advice for young people and that you'd want to have heard before going into the world of work?
I'm going to, well, hopefully give you good advice, but you should never take advice from middle-aged people. It's a terrible idea. You should always make up your own mind. But I think my advice would be learn something practical. So I'm an engineer by trade. I'm an electromechanical engineer, and that was one of those really practical skill sets that you can take anywhere and do anything with. With an engineering degree, you can design heat and building strategies. You could design a submarine. You can design a building. You can do all sorts of useful things. So I would say learn a practical skill. Take an apprenticeship and learn how to weld. Take project management. Get some useful basic skill which you can then apply anywhere. And don't be limited by how you define yourself. Because I get a little bit frustrated sometimes when people say, oh, I couldn't possibly study engineering. I'm creative. And I'm like, what's more creative than engineering, where you're solving problems that no one's ever had before, where you're collaborating with other people to come up with entirely new ideas because you've got something going down, a bit of machinery that's doing something that no one's ever seen it do before, or a new problem to solve. So I think getting those practical skills under your belt, whether that is learning how to weld, whether that is being able to drive a vehicle, whether that is architecture, engineering, something that you can kind of hang your hat on and take that skill set out into the world, and then apply it in a field that matters to you. Because once you have practical skills, whether you get those through an apprenticeship or through college, you can then use that to work in healthcare, to work in the environment, to work in the natural spaces, and you can take that on any journey that you like.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. So it's thinking, rather than the end goal, think about the skills you can build up and have to create whatever you want to do in life.
That's it. You don't have to know what you want to do when you're 17. You can change. I mean, I was an engineer for 20 years and now I'm a politician. You won't only have one career in your life. You'll probably have several. So pick up skills that you like. If you like to work with your hands, pick up some skills you work with your hands. If you like to work with a computer, do those things. All of those things will be useful, and then you can take them anywhere you want.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. That's the end of my questions. So I massively appreciate you joining us today and allowing me to ask some questions.
Not at all. That's been wonderful. Thank you, Aidan.
Thank you.